looking at something that I have divided chapter 3 with 3 succinct sections and given them captions or headings. The first part I want to show you, we're talking about a man who was upright. The word is integrity. There's something whole. There's something that is transparent and very clear about Job. What we're going to see in the next section, he certainly has to endure suffering. Grievous, undeserved suffering. Because he is a righteous guy. What we see at the end of chapter 1, his integrity, the tam, the word I used in Hebrew, is still intact. Is still intact. Now we haven't read the end, but that is chapter 1. Let's look at a few things in chapter 1 that can help us, and I'll make a few comments about it. The first is Job's integrity as a man, and I want to unpack the word righteousness in terms of biblical theology, looking into the New Testament and reminding us of 2 or 3 facts in biblical theology. First, the fact there is none righteous, no, not one. Now, I know Paul brings this out when he says we are all have sinned, right? There's no one. Job is not sinless, but he was upright and blameless, and he made sure. That's why he did this sacrifice stuff. Simply put, righteousness is about being right with God. And that's a good way to start. Is my heart right with God? The Methodist movement that started with young men committing to the gospel, who went out with John Wesley on horseback in England, that's the first thing they said when they met one another. They would say, is your heart right with God? Now, it would be funny if every one of us came to church and the first time you say, Bill, is your heart right with God? That would scare me, like, okay. But, you know, I think that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to ask ourselves that this righteousness has less to do about, am I looking, my daughter, by the way, told me to do this to my shirts. Let's look nice. Yeah. I got my youngest daughter, she's graduating in March, and she tells me all these little tricks. Okay. So she said, Dad, try this, Dad. And I said, what is this? I said, this is crazy. She said, look, everybody, this is cool. Okay. So, we always think the external thing, okay? How many of us give enough time each day to ask, is my heart right with God? Or even have an accountability group. And not just during women's luncheons or men's breakfasts. I mean, we always do that stuff. But is that something that systematically we do? Is your heart right with God? The second part of that, where Job's friendship is determined in relation to his loyalty. I think this is where he draws into the very important famous word in the Old Testament, hesed, God's covenantal love. It is based on loyalty. And Satan wants to destroy that and put conditionality. But God's love is always unconditional. God's going to stay loyal to what he said and commanded. The question is, will we remain loyal? That's the essence of friendship. And what we see in this first section is a love that is loyal. Because if it's love, it's got to be loyal. And if it's loyal, it expresses love. It's loyal love. Hesed, agape, is being triggered. We'll see more of that expression, where self-emptying, kenosis, and sacrifice is represented in the cross of Christ. But I don't want to jump the gun, but there is something about loyal love that we see here, a love that commits. It's not just about how I feel this morning, what you've done to me that I'm going to do back to you. It's a commitment. God's holding to it. Will Job hold on to God? The second thing I want to mention about fear, and we did this last. Here is a man, he was just a man like you and I, cut out of the same cloth that you and I. He was a man, but he feared God. That fear of God, I mentioned in wisdom literature, is actually the beginning of wisdom. That's how you understand what the Lord requires of you, is because you fear him. Is to shun evil, fear God. What is not to forgotten is the result of that fear of God, at least in Old Testament understanding, and I'll come to that in the New Testament, is that God's favor was upon him. That favor is seen and typically accepted in that God did two things. God favored him by having his hand of blessing upon him, and by extension on his family, and by extension on his business, and by extension on his flock and servants. You know what I'm saying? You say, oh, God has blessed this guy. Why? Because he feared God. But there's another aspect of the fear of God that many times I have not really sensed and intentionally claimed. And Satan recognized that because Job feared God, you know what else God did to him? He not just favored him, he put a fence around him. I don't know what you're trying, hedge, is that put a hedge around Job? Is that what it says? Maybe I lived in the UK for some time, did my research in Oxford and then Leeds and all that stuff. A hedge is different. A hedge is not, we like, here's a garden and here's the hedge. A hedge is this huge wall of protection. If you have property that's worth something, or you're growing something in your land that's precious or important, you put a hedge, which means this has thorny bushes, keeps people out. Can't get into that, right? There's a hedge. Satan recognized that. Think about that. He says, I've been trying to mess with this guy, but every time I go, it's your hedge. Now, God does not take down that hedge, but he has the right to lower it. And he does that. A life and a faith that is not tested cannot be trusted. God allows that, and we come to that, the aspect of sovereignty. But I want to know something about this protection of God. I want to know when I commute from DC to teach here every week that I have that hedge. When I go overseas to teach and there's all kinds of political issues, I have this hedge. When I'm in weekends in some fancy hotel with all these TV, with all these filthy channels, I need a hedge. Or when I'm there and I'm like, oh, it's tax time, I don't think I need to report that. I need a hedge. God needs to protect my integrity. And I don't know who you are or what you're struggling with. I think to know that God has put a hedge and that whatever's inside, namely my integrity, is valuable for him. Don't lose it. So fortune, I won't go into now, but there are many of us male guys here in this room. But God touches the three things for male ego: his business, his relationship, and his body. Some of you ladies are nodding because you touch those three things with your husband, sometimes all the hell breaks loose. We are so careful about, this is my job, this is my money. You don't understand, right? What God says, Job, your business. And by the way, you measured it with livestock. God took it away. Secondly, his family. I'm so proud of my two daughters. Imagine if you had 10 of them and all got along together and they won the Super Bowl. I would be really proud. And then next week we'll see that. He sends this lightning and and all of them die. Just one servant comes, 3 strikes. And there's a fourth one, destroys everybody. Takes his business, everything he owns, possessions, and takes the people he loved the most. But there's a third thing. And I would like to say is health. And you would say, yeah. But I'm going to look at it in the ancient Near Eastern culture in non-Western eyes. Because later we will see, when Job sits on that ash heap, and he's scraping it off with a piece of pottery, even the children spit and mock at him. You know what he loses? What every man hates? His dignity. Now, I'm not saying this is a man-woman thing, but I'm just saying in the narrative, Job being the main player, the writer wants to demonstrate that this guy is shredded. You understand? Except his life, there's nothing worth living for. Less wonder he curses the day he was born. and he wishes for death. You see what I'm saying? So don't get upset when you read about this. You and I would do the same. One more thing before our discussion, and we won't finish it, but I'll just leave it with you. There's this cosmic contest, God versus Satan. I told you they're not equal foes. There's heaven as it is in heaven. Jesus said, pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in. Are we part of doing the will of God on earth as it is in heaven? We don't know what it is in heaven. And that's the key to remember. Job is unaware of this deal that God is making with Satan. But my biggest thing I want to leave with you is to start thinking, and we'll pick it up on Tuesday, who is this Satan? Or I like to use the Hebrew, Ha-Satan. That's how we say it in Arabic and other, Satan. Ha-Satan, the devil, the article. In other words, he's not like all the other jinns. This guy is the chief jinn. He's in charge. Just a comment that he's a created angelic being. The word angel, anglios, in the New Testament simply means a messenger. So you, for example, euangelios is a good messenger. We get the English word evangelism, one who brings good news. So when you say angels, he's just a messenger. The most common way in which angels are described in the Bible are ministering spirits. So they serve. They're there to do God's bidding. You see pictures in Isaiah 6. They have 6 wings. With 2 they kind of fly around. With 2 they cover the face of His holiness. With 2 they keep their feet. So they're messengers. They do His bidding. But there are 3 other words I want you to note regarding this particular agent of God. I'm using the word agent because in some ways they represent God. In some ways they misrepresent God. But they're still agents. All right? Now, don't think of Sherlock Holmes kind of a thing, but although there is investigation of what he's doing, there is this agency, the means through which God communicates. He sends angels. Jesus' birth, all kinds of angels telling all kinds of people, right? So you will see this in Scripture, angels communicating on behalf of God as agents for God. The 3 things I want you to remember about Satan, that first of all, he's an adversary. He's an adversary. There's someone who's against us because ultimately he's against God. And there's something we can do that he doesn't like and he wants. I don't know what you would say that is. Let me repeat it. Anyone take a guess? There's something that we give God that Satan does not like because he wants it. Worship. Okay, we'll come to that. And that's why I'll show you Job's reaction is shocking. And he's like, God won the Super Bowl. I mean, this is it. There's no contest. So keep that in mind. What is worship? Let me leave you with these thoughts, at least 2. That's why God created us, to worship. You say, well, what literally is worship? Very simply put, when we ascribe worth to who God is, it's worship, not for what he does for us. And I think this is a very important truth that our generation, with this health and wealth and prosperity gospel, name it and claim it stuff, needs to be clarified. We worship God because of who he is, not because of what he does. And if there's nothing else, I think this is what's happening. And our generation, our millennials, need to hear this. Just because God doesn't do things your way doesn't mean in any way he's lesser God or not sovereign. That's the bottom line. Secondly, he's the accuser. He's a cynic. I don't know. Do you know someone who's a cynic? You know who an optimist and a pessimist is? Who's an optimist? Someone who says that the glass is half full. A pessimist says the glass is half empty. And a cynic says it's poison. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, there's people. That's Satan. He brings the worst out of us. Why do you think Job's worshiping you? Not for nothing. I mean, you did all these things. You bribed the guy. Did he? And God says, no. I know my servant Job. He's my friend. Loyalty. Not for what I give or take away, by the way. So, I want to say there is this problem. And I say this very carefully in our church. It's not here in our church, but you may be visiting another church and you'll find this problem of accusing people, of blaming someone else. Satan is the accuser of the brethren. Revelation. He is known as the accuser. When you and I, even if we're in church, have this habit, I think we're casting a lot with another father. Finally, he attacks us. And what I think I described as Peter's picture of Satan as a roaring lion, moving to seeking whom he may what? Satan attacks. It's sad, but I will show you in the days to come that even when Satan stops attacking, and I don't know which is worse, Job's friends heap attacks on him. And I sometimes wonder which was worse. So don't think that it's all about the red dress guy with the horns with a tail and a pitchfork. He's an angel of light. That's what's scary.